My name is Dr. Karen Gunson. I'm the Oregon State Medical Examiner. The Medical Examiner's Office became alarmed when we discovered that we were mishandling Native American remains here in Oregon. We wanted to produce a program to educate law enforcement and medical examiners around the state on how to handle Native American remains. But we didn't have the expertise, so we turned to our friends at the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office for help.
I'm Clackamas County Sheriff Craig Roberts, and we're pleased to partner with the Oregon State Medical Examiner's Office to help provide information regarding the laws about how together we can better protect Native American remains and artifacts.
Hardly any spot upon the face of the earth is more sacred and hallowed than that into which the remains of a loved one was lowered to sleep on in undisturbed repose.
When I die, my body goes back to the ground. I'm fulfilling a promise. But also the land is fulfilling its promise by taking care of my body and my heart and my bones. My body is to remain in that ground until the world ends. If my bones are removed from that ground before the end of time, there is a violation.
Any discovered remains suspected to be Native Indian shall be reported to the state police, State Historic Preservation Officer, the appropriate Indian tribe, and the Commission on Indian Services. This law prevents the inappropriate, insensitive, and illegal removal of Native American remains, and it's part of your professional toolkit.
We, as the State Medical Examiner Office, had directed county investigators to simply dig up these remains, put them in a box, and send them to us for investigation. Now, this is not the proper way to handle these ancient Indian remains. The State Medical Examiner's Office came up with a plan to produce an educational video which would explain this law and explain why it is so important to follow it.
During the course of their work, Oregon law enforcement personnel and medical examiners will encounter skeletal remains. Here's just one example of many. In September 2008, while the Oregon Zoo was working on an exhibit, human remains were accidentally unearthed by equipment. Portland police and state medical examiners responded to the scene. They concluded that the remains weren't Native American and weren't part of a crime scene. It looks as if workers had accidentally unearthed an historic gravesite. But what if they had unearthed Native remains?
A first responder sees the fact that remains are buried. That is one of the first indicators that you might be discovering an inadvertent Native American burial based on the fact that it's in the ground and it's been inadvertently discovered.
For law enforcement personnel, the discovery of remains may lead us to believe we're dealing with a crime scene. But some remains are part of Native American burial sites and may even contain tribal artifacts. The state of Oregon is celebrating its 150-year history. But it's important to know that the history of this land and of its native culture goes back thousands of years.
We have history here that goes back more than 10,000 years, and we preserve that history through oral history and our Indian language, our tradition, and our customs.
There are approximately 50,000 Native Americans living in Oregon, in all of Oregon's 36 counties, and we have a legal and cultural responsibility to determine if we're dealing with the remains of their ancestors. What's more, we must deal with those remains in a legal, culturally sensitive manner. This means making 3 crucial phone calls if you find a burial site, and working with the proper authorities and the tribes. This video will lay out that process step by step.
the state of Oregon has a law that has to be followed by everyone. And if that law isn't followed, then why is the law there?
Law enforcement personnel, prosecutors, and medical examiners need to respect ancestral remains, which should be left in place whenever possible.
State law designed a system for there to be 3 notifications in the event of discovery of Native American human remains. The first, the state police, and that's to ascertain that it's not a criminal scene. 2, the State Historic Preservation Office, that is the main office that deals with archaeological permits and the archaeological aspects of state law. The Legislative Commission on Indian Services is contacted because it is the liaison for the state of Oregon with Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes.
Disturbing or excavating native remains or objects, whether by accident or on purpose, interferes with a tribe's heritage and ceremonial rights. We are legally required to get help from professionals familiar with Native American burials who can identify the remains.
And our role is to protect cultural resources on all lands in the state, and to work with both federal and state and local individuals to protect both state and federal laws.
It is state law to protect and preserve Oregon's cultural heritage. This includes archaeologically significant objects and sites. Oregon law prohibits excavating, injuring, destroying, or altering an archaeological site or willfully removing an archaeological object from state, public, or private lands without a permit. The law also protects tribal members from the sale, barter, or display of sacred Native American objects. This includes funerary objects. Items that legally belong to Native Americans must either be reburied or returned to the appropriate tribe at the tribe's direction. These laws allow the State Historic Preservation Office to preserve Oregon's cultural heritage. They also allow the state's 9 federally recognized Native American tribes, each with its own separate governmental authority, to preserve their cultural heritage.
They're a direct connection to our past. Without them and the history that they have, we don't have a future. There's a real strong feeling in the tribe that without a history, you don't have a future. And so it's real important to protect those things that represent our past.
It's the major topic of discussion when the tribes meet with state officials at the quarterly Cultural Resources Cluster Group. There are felony and civil penalties for breaking these laws, including a fine of up to $10,000 for actual damages, including emotional distress. Native American burial sites are sacred and represent a tribe's continuing connection with its ancestors. Ancestral remains and funerary objects are protected under state law. That means we are legally bound to treat ancestral remains and associated objects in a sensitive and respectful manner. Native American burials are often distinct from other types of burials. They can be found anywhere on the landscape.
A good general rule of thumb is if you're in flat land that's near water, a good place to live is a good place to live. If you've got a house that's on a bluff overlooking a river, there's a good chance there's an archaeological site somewhere around. If you're living adjacent to the river, I can guarantee you there's going to be a site somewhere nearby. You know, if you're near a stream confluence, you're going to find a site. So generally, if you're within walking distance of fresh water and you've got flat land, you've got a really high potential for finding an archaeological site.
But some locations are unique to Native American burial practices. For example, human remains might be exposed in shell middens, a mixture of shells, animal bones, fire-cracked rock, and charcoal. Sometimes bodies are buried in talus slopes, slopes covered in loose rocks. In these cases, multiple burials might create rows of narrow, irregular terraces on the side of a bluff. Grave markers made of poles, tubular ground stone, piled rocks or boulders, or piled dirt might survive. How the body is placed in the ground may provide further clues. There may be a burial pit. The ground may be burned or lined with textiles, soil, wood, or stones. The body may be flexed or oriented in a certain direction. There may be remnant wood at the grave site, for example, pieces of a canoe used as a coffin. Most Native American burials also contain artifacts, also known as grave goods. These might include hunting, fishing, or gathering implements, including rifles, harpoon points, fishing hooks, and antler handles. There may be tools or ornaments, including beads or pendants. If conditions are right, basketry, wood, or textiles may survive with the human remains. There may also be animal bones. Occasionally in Native American burials, horses are killed over a grave, and animal parts may also be buried with a human body to substitute for missing human bones. These are the sorts of clues a trained forensic anthropologist might use to identify a native burial site.
There are a lot of good characteristics in the cranial features for Native peoples that we can determine whether or not this perhaps could be a prehistoric burial or a contemporary case. Anything below the cranium is minimal as far as the physical characteristics.
It's also worth noting that finding partial native remains is the same as finding an entire body in the eyes of the tribe and the law. But law enforcement professionals and local medical examiners don't need to know all this to suspect they've found one of these sites. Here's a good rule of thumb. If human remains, discovered accidentally or through criminal investigations, are not clearly modern, then there is a possibility that the remains are Native American. That means Oregon law requires you to immediately make 3 phone calls.
By law, it requires contact with the Commission of Indian Services, State Historic Preservation Office, and the Oregon State Police. And then from that point on, the Commission of Indian Services will provide the local tribe to be in contact with.
A member of the public finds human remains and calls law enforcement. When the officer or deputy responds, they should ask themselves these questions. Are there Native American tools or artifacts nearby? Are there modern items at the site, for example, jeans, zippers, buckles, or plastics? If not, you may be dealing with Native American remains. Is there any indication this is recent? Unless the remains can be proven to be modern, assume they could be Native American and treat them accordingly. A qualified professional will be able to determine fairly quickly if the find is a few months old, a few years old, a few decades old, or a few centuries old. But remember, you only need to suspect the remains are Native American. You do not need to prove it. If you are not sure, follow these procedures. Law enforcement personnel should contact their medical examiner's office. On-site deputy medical examiners should then contact the state medical examiner's office to ensure a prompt and thorough examination of the remains at the site. This examination can be conducted by a forensic anthropologist or an anthropologist from the local tribe. The Oregon State Medical Examiner has an arguable legal responsibility to notify tribes when possible native burials are discovered. This ensures against serious issues.
You certainly can call the state medical examiner's office, and we will be glad to help you contact the proper authorities and the appropriate tribe.
Do not move the remains. The tribes want the remains left in place whenever possible and reinterred at the tribe's discretion when they must be moved. The tribes do not want the remains stored at the state medical examiner's office. Whenever possible, examiners should use only the skull to ID Native American remains in the field, not other bones. Secure the area, just as you might secure a crime scene, pending instructions from the State Historic Preservation Officer. Slow down. Take your time.
The main thing I wanted to emphasize is just slow down a little bit. Don't automatically think that we've got a homicide here, that we're looking at someone that has just disappeared, a missing person. Sit back, think a little bit about it, and then seek the expertise as needed and make some of the phone calls.
The remains and associated objects should not be disturbed, manipulated, or transported from the original location until a culturally sensitive plan has been developed with the proper authorities. First responders on scene, such as the deputy or the local medical examiner, must then contact 3 agencies: the Oregon State Police, the State Historic Preservation Office, and the Commission on Indian Services. The Commission on Indian Services will be able to help you contact all appropriate Native American tribes.
The Commission on Indian Services is designated by law as the person that indicates who the appropriate Indian tribes are that need to be contacted to arrange for the repatriation or reburial of Native American human remains.
Representatives from the tribe or tribes should be consulted at the site, if possible, regarding proper handling or repatriation of the remains and artifacts. Each tribe has a cultural resource contact authorized to handle these remains and objects. Do not contact the media. Getting the media involved risks letting looters know the location of the burial site. It could also lead to unauthorized photos and video of the remains.
The police did a really good job of helping us secure the scene. The actual landowner built a guard around it that completely obstructed the view so that the local media couldn't take photographs or film us, either during the reburial process or during the recovery process that we had going on. And that was a really good instance.
Do not take unnecessary photographs. It is considered culturally insensitive to do so. Again, any photos taken should not be released to the media. If it is deemed a native burial site, those photos should then be destroyed. The following of these protocols should be well documented to provide a good procedural reference and to keep tribal leaders informed. Some additional notes. If the site is on federal land, a Bureau of Land Management or U.S. Forest Service archaeologist should accompany Oregon State Police officers to the site to evaluate the age and cultural affiliations of the find. The agency archaeologist and the State Historic Preservation Office archaeologist can recommend a physical anthropologist to study the remains if they've been removed. If the remains are found in a citizen's home or in a citizen's possession, the same protocols should be followed. Find out from the citizen how they acquired these materials, if they knew where the materials came from, and when and where they were found. Remember, education and enforcement go hand in hand. Landowners should be made aware that their land cannot be taken away. Fear that it can often prevents landowners from reporting human or cultural remains found on their property. And tribal leaders are happy to work with home builders and the public to find a fair resolution whenever remains are found. The state of Oregon proudly supports cultural sensitivity and good cultural stewardship. Law enforcement officials and medical examiners are a crucial part of this process.
So it's extremely important that you do not remove, box, send, or in any way disturb these remains and the artifacts that are associated with them in any way until you contact the entities that we've already talked about.
The general public, raised in a finders-keepers culture, may not fully understand tribal sovereignty and the Native American regard for remains. Found remains belong to the tribe, not to those who find the remains.
We still have a faction of people out there that collect these items and put them on display. That is horrendous. And we find out about that. We work on those, and we'll do what we need to do as far as investigations go.
The state of Oregon is committed to protecting and honoring all cultural resources, especially those of the Oregon tribes, and is proud to work with tribes and tribal leaders. And we must respect their burial sites as we respect our own, no matter their size or where they're found.
How would you feel if I went into your cemetery and dug up your grandfather and took the artifacts out? How would you feel?
Law enforcement officers should review the Oregon Revised Statutes addressing Native American remains and our archaeological resources.
If you're a first responder, you may very likely during your career find yourself investigating human remains. I encourage you to take the time now to to review the Oregon Revised Statutes. If you do this, you will find yourself better prepared to handle these remains lawfully and with respect.
Chapters 97, 358, and 390 provide basic guidance on Oregon's archaeological laws. You can get additional guidance from the State Historical Preservation Office. Make an effort to get to know your local tribes. Build that relationship before an inadvertent discovery. Your local tribe is an invaluable source to learn more about Oregon's rich history.
It's not just our history, it's everyone's history. It's a shared history.